How did you transfer from creating WebTel or working with WebTel to through WebPay, and then especially the shift toward privacy as your primary focus at Ground Labs?
Yeah, so the ISP business went on for many years, and we became exposed to a lot of business customers, and they started wanting to host their e-commerce websites with us. And so that naturally progressed to questions about how do we do payment? And at that time, the way you did payment was you had a form on your website. It collected the customer's details, their credit card number, and then it shot an email to you. And then you would manually post-process that credit card number in the background. Oh, yeah. That was e-commerce in the 1990s. Very few people had a live payment link through to their bank. It was you could do it, but it was expensive.
That was a Wild West, man. I remember late 90s and just like sending my credit card numbers in 3 emails to a record store or something like that, and hoping that they didn't get intercepted. And
we all did it. Absolutely. And that was the norm. And it was actually the guys I was working with sort of, I guess, asked the simple question, hey, what if we started getting a link to a bank and offering live payments as part of our service? And so that's where the idea for the whole payment gateway, payment processor began, which is actually where WebPay was born out of. So we had WebTel and then WebPay was born out of that. And, the ISP business went into decline because basically if you're still in the dial-up world, all of your customers were migrating to DSL, ADSL technologies, and you had to be one of the big guys to have access to that infrastructure. And we were still relatively small, but we saw a lot of promise in this payments idea that we were running. And so that morphed into a fully fledged payment processing business. The team started writing their own payment switching technology to take payments over high latency internet links, because at that time, internet was a bit slower. One of our earliest larger clients was actually an auction site, and they were hosting all of their infrastructure out of, I think, California. But the payment had to go back to Australia to be processed in real time, and they just couldn't get it working. It kept dropping out and timing out. And so we came out with this technology that could handle high latency networks and still get the payment through reliably. And so that became something that we got a knock on the door one day from one of Australia's large banks saying, we'd like to put some money into you and then have you start selling this software to the rest of the world, to banks all around the world. They thought there was a huge market in the fact that at the time banks were on old legacy infrastructure, mainframes and so on, for their payment switches. And we were this, small agile company running Intel servers, Linux, Java, and we had all of this cutting edge e-commerce technology. So that, just suddenly before you knew it, we were in the payments game. We were no longer in the ISP game. And that journey split in 2 directions. The bank said, right, the software business goes off separately from the payments processing business. And so I chose to stay with the payments processing business. Right. And so we basically just continued to offer payment processing services to merchants large and small around the country. And towards the end, we were processing about several $1 billion a year in value. So it became quite a successful business. Yeah.
Did you have any sort of hurdles along the way in terms of like the scale up? Because, when you hear, a major bank say, we'd like to throw a lot of money at you, like, that is sometimes a success story, and an awful lot of times that's like, okay, there's still something wrong here. Were you able to take that investment, and if so, like how did you avoid that trap of like all money and no time or no schedule or whatever?
Yeah, it's a good question, Chris. So for context, all of that capital injection was really for what they were interested in, which was the software business. Got it. And so that capital stayed over there, and they continued on for some years, and they ended up being acquired by Fidelity, which was called eFunds at the time, which is a big bank software company. And so that was a good fit over there. But the direction I took was on the services side, where we were processing payments in return for a clip fee, 50-cent clip fee at the time, and that continued to be organically funded and bootstrapped. And so we basically, it did end up getting bought into a family office, and so they gave gave us some additional capital to start driving that a little bit larger and put some management infrastructure. We were all very young at that time. And so it was good for me because it meant that, I was being put around some more experienced people. I learned a lot more through that journey. Yeah. And a big part of that journey ended up being a pivot to needing to focus on security. One day, Visa knocked on the door and said, look, you're connected to our network. You're processing all of these payments. We have no idea how secure you are. Mm-hmm. And at that time, they were just starting to see fraud go through the roof because of card not present e-commerce payments on the internet. Mm-hmm. And so Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and all of the other major card brands said, we need to fix this problem, because if no one can no longer trust using their credit card, then no one's going to want to hold a credit card in their wallet. So they took control of the situation, started certifying anyone that was connected to the network, and then they started wanting to check the security of every e-commerce and other form of merchant out there in the world. And I could see this coming, as I was one of the first people in Australia to be assessed under what is now called the PCI security standards, which is the payment card industry. Mm-hmm. And so through that journey, I learned an awful lot about what you had to do to make a network safe for credit card processing. And suddenly I was consulting to all of our clients that were being knocked on the door and had to do the same thing. So I quickly developed an expertise in the area of payment security. Yeah. And, just seeing firsthand how businesses were handling such sensitive information like payment cards was, the biggest eye-opener in realizing that everybody was so desensitized to handling this data the way we were for so long, just emailing it to each other, dumping it out into Excel spreadsheets and just sharing it around anyway with no encryption, because we were behind the firewall and we thought it was okay. Yeah. And it's so... therein lies the problem, right? That's why fraud was going up. It was so easy to break into networks, still is, but at that time it was even easier.
How about some free cybersecurity training resources for you and your team? Just go to infosecinstitute.com/free to get ebooks, training guides, and more than 100 cybersecurity training courses, all free for CyberWork listeners. Go to infosecinstitute.com/free and start learning crucial new skills today.